There was a knock at the door followed by the sound of boots stepping onto my front porch like they owned the place. I looked up from my coffee, still wearing my old flannel shirt and mismatched socks, and stared out the window. That's when I saw it. A primly dressed woman with a clipboard, a man in a shiny suit with a Bluetooth earpiece, and a photographer with a drone setting up by my barn. I hadn't ordered anything, wasn't expecting anyone, and definitely hadn't invited strangers to walk my land like it was some kind of public park. I opened the door to tell them to get lost, but before I could say a word, the woman barked out, "Oh good, you're awake. We're showing the property today. You'll need to stay out of the way. My farm. My house. My land." And somehow they were trying to sell it while I was still standing in the doorway. I thought it was a prank. It wasn't. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake. This was Karen, the HOA president from 3 streets over, and she had completely lost her mind. This all started a few months after the county approved that new development on the west side. I was one of the last remaining parcels that wasn't folded into the HOA complex, mostly because my land had been family-owned for generations. My grandfather had settled here after returning from the war, built the original cabin by hand, and slowly expanded it into the ranch I now lived on. The house might have been modest, but the land, oh, the land was gold. Open fields, fertile soil, and a creek running through the back. A developer's dream. I had refused every offer that came my way, no matter how inflated the check was. And every time I turned one down, Karen's smile got thinner. Karen wasn't your average HOA president. She was the type that treated her position like a throne and the neighborhood like her private kingdom. She liked to parade around in golf carts like a mall cop with a god complex, barking orders through a walkie-talkie, fining people for leaving their trash bins out past 9 a.m. or planting the wrong shade of azaleas. I wasn't technically under her jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her from trying to muscle her way into mine. It started small. A letter here, a notice there. An HOA newsletter accidentally delivered to my mailbox with a highlighted section about property alignment. I laughed. I should have taken it more seriously. Back to the porch, Karen didn't even flinch when I demanded to know what she was doing. She gestured around with a plastic grin and said, "We've decided to rezone your parcel into the new phase of the Lakeside Estates expansion. You're sitting on what will be our community clubhouse and private tennis court. You'll get a generous buyout. You're welcome." Before I could fire back, the Realtor chimed in, talking about comps in the area, investor interest, and something about an escrow timeline. I stared at him, stunned. They'd actually planned a sale. Without me. As if I was just another abandoned barn on the map. That's when I noticed the sign. At the bottom of my driveway, sticking proudly into my soil, was a giant white and red board that read "For sale, prime development, contact Karen at Lakeside HOA." My jaw locked. My blood boiled. I stormed past them and yanked it out of the dirt so hard I nearly pulled my shoulder. Karen tooted like I was a child having a tantrum and said I was being dramatic. Dramatic. For being angry that someone was trying to sell the roof over my head. I told them to get off my land. Karen ignored me. The photographer kept clicking away. And the Realtor made a note on his clipboard and asked what year the barn had been built. I grabbed my phone and started recording. They left after I threatened to call the sheriff and sue them all for trespassing. Karen rolled her eyes and muttered something about people not understanding community progress. I stood there in the driveway for a long time after they were gone, gripping that stupid sign, staring at the tire tracks in my gravel. They weren't bluffing. Karen had crossed the line in a way I never imagined possible. This wasn't about real estate. This was about control. About power. She didn't just want my land, she wanted to erase me from it and pretend I never existed. Later that afternoon, I checked my trail cams. I had several set up around the property, mostly to watch for coyotes and the occasional idiot teenager who thought it was funny to sneak onto farmland. I found footage from earlier that morning. Karen and the realtor walking my property lines, pointing, laughing, planning. They had even peeked into my barn. I was lucky they hadn't walked in while I was sleeping. I transferred the footage to a drive and labeled it Karen Gate. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts ran wild. How deep did this go? Was the county involved? Had they filed some paperwork I didn't know about? I pulled up my deed, scanned the legal description, even checked the GPS coordinates. My boundaries hadn't changed. There were no liens, no permits, no legal basis for what Karen had tried. It was all smoke, mirrors, and audacity. She was betting I'd cave from confusion or pressure. She picked the wrong person. The next morning, I drove into town. My first stop was the county records office. I wanted to make absolutely sure no one had tampered with anything. While I was waiting in line, I recognized the woman at the front desk. Rachel. We'd gone to high school together. She recognized me immediately, and after some catching up, she pulled up my record. Everything looked clean, except for one weird addition. A zoning request pending review. Filed by the HOA. Using my parcel number. Rachel frowned. That shouldn't even be allowed without your signature, she said. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just Karen being a nuisance. She was trying to take my land on paper before she ever took it in person. When I left the office, I had a copy of the forged zoning request, Rachel's business card, and a new fire in my chest. Karen wanted a clubhouse. She was about to get a court date instead. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a legal pad, a strong cup of black coffee, and a plan forming in the back of my mind. The sunrise painted gold across the fields, but I couldn't appreciate the view. My jaw was tight, my eyes fixed on the gravel road where Karen's car had pulled in the day before. The nerve it took for someone to march onto a man's land and try to sell it like he didn't even exist was something I still couldn't fully wrap my head around. But one thing was certain. If Karen thought she could bury me under fake zoning claims and shady paperwork, she hadn't met the version of me who'd spent 4 years in the army learning how to track threats and break systems. I drove into town again, this time heading to the zoning department's annex office. It was an aging building with peeling beige paint, faded posters about water conservation, and that unmistakable smell of burnt coffee and ink toner. I didn't announce who I was. I just asked to see the details on zoning requests for Parcel 17B, my land. The clerk behind the glass gave me a suspicious look but eventually printed the files. And there it was. The request had been stamped and filed by a part-time contractor named Owen McCabe. I didn't recognize the name, but the initials matched a junior clerk Karen had mentioned during a past HOA meeting. Someone she bragged about convincing to fast-track things. I had thought it was just Karen exaggerating again. Now I realized she'd been laying the groundwork for this for months. I took the file to Rachel back at the main office. Her eyes went wide when she saw Owen's name. She whispered that he wasn't authorized to file zoning changes without property owner signatures, and especially not without the oversight of a senior reviewer. I asked if that was something she could prove. She hesitated, looked around, and finally nodded. She couldn't give me an official statement, but she could make sure someone opened an investigation. That was all I needed. The dominoes were about to start falling. On my way back, I stopped at a local diner and made a few calls. First to my lawyer, Trent, who I hadn't spoken to since helping me settle my dad's estate. When I told him the situation, he went dead quiet for a moment before letting out a long breath and saying, "They tried to what?" I explained everything. The fake sale. The unauthorized zoning. The trespassing. He told me to start documenting everything, keep records of every visit, every sign, every photo, and to expect this to get uglier before it got better. Then I called my nephew Miles, a tech whiz who worked remotely in cybersecurity. I asked him if he could help me upgrade my surveillance around the farm. He laughed and said he'd bring the gear himself. He arrived the next morning with a drone, 4 motion-activated trail cams, and something he called a perimeter breach sensor. Apparently, Some HOA Karens needed to be reminded that fences and property lines were more than suggestions. Over the next few days, Karen didn't show up herself, but I caught 2 separate instances of unfamiliar cars driving slowly along the road near my fence line. One of them even stopped and took pictures of my livestock before pulling away. I uploaded every video clip and image to a shared folder and sent the link to both Trent and Rachel. By then, Rachel had confirmed that Owen had been suspended pending investigation, and a county official had flagged the HOA's zoning request as fraudulent. Still, Karen hadn't backed down. She sent me a letter, certified mail, no less, saying that failure to cooperate with community development would result in escalating consequences. I read it twice and then laughed so hard I nearly choked on my iced tea. She really thought she was a government official. But while I was building my case, Karen was building her narrative. Flyers started appearing in mailboxes around the neighborhood. I wasn't on the delivery list, of course, but my buddy Jake down the road brought one over. The flyer showed a smiling cartoon-style clubhouse and said Phase 2 of the lakeside expansion would include tennis courts, an Olympic pool, a dog park, and a multi-use community pavilion. My farm was smack in the middle of it. They had even labeled it as Future Site, Construction Begins Summer 2025. I was reading it when Jake said, "You know they posted a digital version too, right?" I didn't. He pulled out his phone and showed me their HOA's shiny new website, complete with an animation that zoomed in over the area and showed little pop-up homes blooming like weed. I clicked pause on the video and there it was. My barn. My house. My damn chicken coop. Rendered like I was a background extra in some real estate fantasy. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I walked the fence line with a flashlight in one hand and a thermos in the other. The stars were out, clear and sharp. I kept thinking about my grandfather, about how hard he worked to hold on to this land during droughts and floods and economic crashes. He'd always said this place would protect us if we protected it. I wasn't going to be the generation that let someone like Karen take it with fake maps and threats in pastel envelope. Miles stayed with me a couple of days to finish installing the motion detectors and connect the footage to a live feed app. He even helped me dig out a couple of old trail markers so we could map my legal boundaries exactly. We found the iron stakes my grandfather had hammered into the dirt 50 years ago. Still there. Still solid. Just like our claim. Miles grinned and said, "This place has better security than my office now." I thanked him and promised him first dibs on eggs from the coop forever. The final straw came when I caught Karen sneaking back onto my land without announcing herself. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a couple in tow, probably more potential buyers, and she was giving them a little tour down by the creek. I watched through binoculars from the upstairs window as she pointed out my storage shed and said something about converting it into a wellness spa. That was it. I marched down the hill, camera rolling, and this time I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I calmly told the couple they were trespassing, informed Karen she was being recorded for a future civil case, and handed them each a printed copy of the zoning fraud report with their names highlighted in bold. The couple turned pale. Karen looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. They left without another word. When I got back to the house, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about defending my land anymore. This was about exposing her. Karen thought she could steamroll people because no one ever stood up to her. But I was going to change that. Not just with words. With court filings. With county records. And with every camera, document, and witness I could muster. She wanted a clubhouse. I was going to build a legal fortress instead. The weekend arrived with a strange, electric tension in the air. I woke up to the sound of tires crunching over gravel and the faint hum of voices near my front gate. When I looked out the window, I counted no less than 5 vehicles parked in the turnaround at the edge of my property. A few people were milling around, dressed too nicely for farm work and clearly out of place. A man with aviator sunglasses was gesturing toward my barn, while a woman in heels snapped photos of my garden beds like she was appraising them. I recognized none of them. But I didn't have to. I already knew what this was. Karen had come back. Not in person this time, but through her proxies, buyers. I stepped outside slowly, coffee in one hand, camera rolling from my porch rail, and asked them plainly if they needed help. One of the men grinned and said they were here for the showing, then asked if I was the caretaker. That word hit me like a slap. The caretaker. As if I was some background character on my own property. I didn't respond. I just told them the land wasn't for sale, had never been for sale, and that they were currently trespassing. One woman looked confused and pulled out a brochure with my property featured in full color. It had the HOA's logo at the top, Karen's name below it, and a quote about unlocking hidden potential through visionary redevelopment. I took a picture of the brochure before asking them again, politely but firmly, to leave. Some of them hesitated, but one couple clearly thought I was bluffing. The man shrugged and said Karen had told them this was just a formal process, that the current resident would be relocated soon. That was the moment the mask fully dropped. Karen had been telling people I was being evicted. She was pretending this was already a done deal. I calmly pointed to my mailbox, where the legal deed with my family name was posted in a weatherproof case, and told them if they wanted to keep believing her story, they should be ready to explain that to the sheriff. That finally got them moving. They left, though not before one of them muttered that they'd be making a complaint about this unprofessional behavior. I laughed out loud at that. I called Trent, updated him on what had just happened, and sent him the photos of the brochure. He told me this crossed a new legal line, attempted fraudulent sale of property, possibly wire fraud if the listings were posted online. He advised me to start collecting statements from witnesses and anyone willing to admit they'd been misled into showing up. I posted a warning to the local community group online and got dozens of messages from people thanking me for the heads-up. One man even shared screenshots of text messages between his wife and Karen where she assured them the property was already under HOA possession, pending some paperwork finalization. That became Exhibit A in what would become a very thick folder. The next day, Karen returned in person. She marched right up the driveway like she owned it, a realtor trailing behind her and trying to keep up. This time, I didn't go outside. I let the cameras do the work. I watched her from the upstairs window as she tried to explain to the realtor why the gate was locked and why I had installed motion sensors on every approach. When she realized I wasn't coming down, she pulled out her phone and started yelling into it, probably calling one of her board members or the sheriff. But this time I was ready. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, he wasn't alone. To my complete surprise, it was Sheriff Holt himself, the elected sheriff of our county. We'd gone to high school together and played baseball on the same team. I hadn't seen him in years, but when he stepped out of the cruiser and saw me at the gate, his expression lit up. I walked over, shook his hand, and briefly explained the situation. Karen interrupted, ranting about how I was obstructing community development, that I was squatting on land earmarked for public amenities, and that the HOA had full authority to manage expansion projects. Holt raised an eyebrow and calmly asked her for any legal documentation to support her claims. She handed him a folder full of the same zoning request copies and promotional brochures. He took one look and handed it right back. I showed him the real documents: my deed, the county clerk's statement, Rachel's note about the fraudulent filing, and the screenshots from buyers who had been misled. He read through them carefully, then turned to Karen and said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am, if you step 1 foot further onto this property, I'll be forced to charge you with trespassing and criminal misrepresentation." Karen went completely silent for the first time since this all began. The realtor quietly turned and walked back to the car without another word. Holt escorted them both to the road, made sure they left, then came back to shake my hand again. He told me to call him directly if there was another incident. I thanked him, offered him a jar of homemade pickles, and he laughed and said he missed this part of town. But I wasn't done. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd play better ones. That evening, I reached out to my cousin Clara, who ran a small but very effective social media marketing firm. I told her everything and asked her to help me create a video. Within 24 hours, she edited together a 6-minute breakdown showing Karen's flyers, the unauthorized listings, footage of her giving tours on my land, and clips from my conversation with Sheriff Holt. We uploaded it to YouTube and shared it on every local group, every HOA watchdog forum, and every real estate consumer protection subreddit we could find. The title was simple: "This HOA President tried to sell my farm while I was still living in it." The video exploded. Thousands of views in the first day. Hundreds of comments pouring in with similar stories, with people expressing their support, and with some users even tagging local news outlet. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just wanted the truth out. But the public had decided. Karen's name was now attached to a scandal. A real, documented, undeniable scandal. For the first time since this started, I felt the momentum shift. People were talking. People were watching. Karen couldn't hide this under HOA legalese or passive-aggressive newsletters anymore. She had tried to bulldoze her way through my life, and now the road ahead of her was full of potholes she had dug herself. I sat on my porch that evening as the sun went down, chickens roosting, wind chimes swaying, and the glow of my phone screen reflecting the growing number of shares and likes. I sipped my tea and smiled, knowing this battle was far from over. But now, I wasn't fighting alone. By the end of the week, the fallout had begun. Karen's carefully curated image as a community leader was crumbling faster than she could paste over it. The video had made its way into every local discussion group, and even the town's morning radio show did a short segment calling it the most ridiculous HOA scandal they'd seen in a decade. But what really twisted the knife was when one of Karen's own board members, a mild-mannered man named Joyce with a background in accounting, suddenly resigned and leaked several internal emails to a local reporter. Those emails confirmed everything I had claimed and worse. Karen had been trying to fast-track multiple zoning expansions across the area by targeting non-HOA parcels and reporting them as under provisional agreement. She wasn't just after my land. She was after several properties that bordered the community so she could build her dream clubhouse and name it after herself. She even referred to my place in one email as an unfortunate relic standing in the way of progress. The reporter published the exposé online, linking to my video and attaching screenshots of the emails. It blew up all over again. The comments were brutal. People were disgusted not just by the illegal tactics, but by the sheer arrogance. Karen had underestimated how much regular folks hated being pushed around by bureaucrats who thought they could outpaper them into submission. Her next move was as desperate as it was predictable. She called for an emergency HOA board meeting, which she tried to hold behind closed doors. But thanks to a copy of the bylaws that someone posted online, it became clear that emergency meetings required a public forum if any votes would be made. So I showed up. And I didn't come alone. There were over 40 residents packed into the meeting room that night. Some had never attended a single HOA function before. But they were there now, arms crossed, faces stern, eyes locked on Karen. I took a seat near the back, nodding to a few familiar faces and giving a polite wave to the board secretary, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Karen started the meeting with her usual sing-songy voice, trying to maintain control. She said there had been misunderstandings, miscommunications, and false accusations, that she had always had the best interests of the community in mind. She tried to brush off the emails as being taken out of context. That was when I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point fingers. I simply asked if I could share a few files with the board. Karen tried to cut me off, saying non-members weren't allowed to speak. But several board members overruled her. One of them, an older woman named Marcia, who had clearly had enough of the drama, even asked aloud if Karen was afraid of what I'd show. I stepped forward, plugged in a USB stick to the community room's projector, and brought up a folder titled Evidence. Then I clicked through. Video footage of trespassing, brochures with false listings, recorded conversations, screenshots of zoning fraud. The emails Joyce had leaked. The room went silent except for the occasional gasp or low whisper. Even Karen was frozen, her lips pressed into a tight line. I ended by showing my deed again, with the county seal and timestamp. One man raised his hand and asked Karen point-blank, "Did you authorize the listing of this man's property?" She tried to deflect. He repeated the question. Finally, she admitted that she may have been overzealous in interpreting future development zones. That was all it took. The board called a vote right then and there. Not only was Karen removed as president, but she was also suspended from the HOA entirely pending further legal review. I watched as she sat there in stunned silence, eyes darting around the room like she was waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. She gathered her things slowly, tried to mutter something about lawyers, and then walked out. No applause, no outburst. Just the heavy weight of public shame dragging behind her. The next few days were strangely quiet. A new interim president was appointed, a man named Derek who seemed genuinely interested in making peace. He called me the following morning and apologized, stating that he had no idea how far Karen had gone with her schemes and that he'd be working with the county to ensure all records were corrected. He also told me that the HOA would be issuing a formal retraction of all promotional materials and canceling the development plans entirely. I told him I appreciated the gesture, but I'd still be pursuing legal action. He understood. Trent filed a civil lawsuit the next day. Fraud, trespassing, defamation, and attempted conversion of property. We had everything we needed: documents, videos, eyewitnesses, even media coverage. Karen's lawyer tried to reach out for a settlement, but Trent advised me to hold firm. We wanted this on record. Meanwhile, county officials launched a zoning review, not just on my property, but on several others that had been quietly targeted by Karen's scheme. At least 2 more homeowners came forward with similar stories. One elderly couple had almost signed over rights to their back lot after Karen convinced them it was legally required. When they found out the truth, they cried. I invited them over for pie. But the best moment came when my cousin Clara sent me a notification. My video had been picked up by a national HOA watchdog YouTube channel. They featured the story in a 30-minute segment with commentary, calling it one of the most ridiculous overreaches in recent HOA history. The top comment read, "She tried to sell his farm while he was still in it. That's a whole new level of entitled." I couldn't have agreed more. By the end of the month, my property was officially recognized, again, as fully independent and not subject to any HOA review, oversight, or claim. A county inspector came by just to double-check all boundary lines and left laughing, saying I had more documentation than most courthouses. I took the moment to install a new sign at the gate. Hand-carved, sealed in varnish. It read, "Family Farm since 1948. No trespassing. No tours. No Karens." I thought that might be the end of it, but I wasn't quite done. Karen still owned the lot across the street, a tiny parcel she used to host HOA yard sales. It was technically outside the community's current zoning. So, I bought the strip of land between her lot and the main road, just a narrow sliver, maybe 20 feet wide, but enough to legally block all access unless granted an easement. And I wasn't in the mood to grant anything. She would need to take the long way around now, through the drainage ditch and overgrown trail she once called an eyesore. Sometimes poetic justice isn't loud. It's inconvenient, humiliating, and permanent. As spring rolled in and the trees budded again, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. My land was safe. The invaders were gone. And justice, in its own slow, stubborn way, had found its mark. The morning air was crisp with dew as I walked the fence line, boots sinking slightly into the soft spring grass. Everything felt different now. Not because the land had changed, if anything, it was exactly the same as it had always been, but because the pressure was gone. The weight of eyes watching from across the road, The creeping anxiety that someone might sneak onto my land with a clipboard and fake authority, all of it had finally lifted. The silence was peaceful, not tense. My chickens clucked lazily from their coop, and my dogs trotted behind me, free from the stress that had gripped the farm for weeks. There was a finality to everything, and yet the story hadn't quite finished. Not until I made sure Karen learned that her schemes hadn't just failed, they had backfired beyond repair. I still remember the moment the final court documents were signed. Trent handed them to me with a smirk, saying Karen had agreed to a settlement that included a public apology, reimbursement for legal fees, and an acknowledgement of wrongdoing in the county archives. It was a satisfying moment, not just for the win, but because it was permanent. Her name and actions would be on record for anyone to see. There was no sweeping it under the rug, no last-minute spin to make herself look like a victim. She had pushed too far and underestimated how deep my roots were. You don't mess with a man's land and think there won't be consequences. What surprised me, though, was how fast the community turned. After years of tolerating Karen's behavior, people seemed genuinely relieved to see someone push back and win. The new HOA president, Derek, turned out to be a breath of fresh air. He organized a proper community vote to revise the HOA charter, placing strict limits on board authority and requiring resident approval for any land acquisition attempts. He even invited me to speak at the next public meeting. I declined politely. I didn't want applause or attention. I just wanted peace. But I did send them a short written statement that Derek read aloud. It ended with a simple line: "Respect isn't something you vote into power, it's something you earn." A few weeks later, I was sipping iced tea on my porch when I noticed a real estate sign going up across the street. Karen's lot, the one she used for HOA events, was now for sale. Rumors had already spread that she was moving out of the neighborhood. Whether it was shame, pressure from residents, or the aftermath of legal fees, I didn't know and didn't care. She was leaving, and that was enough. I watched the sign go up with quiet satisfaction. I never spoke to her again. Not a single word. Some endings don't need a confrontation. They just need time and gravity to pull the truth into place. But I wasn't finished. Not quite. I had something else in mind. Something that would make a statement without a single word. I called up my cousin Clara again and told her I had an idea for the land across the street, the one Karen used to flaunt as her staging ground. With her gone, I knew there would be competition to buy it, probably from other HOA members looking to keep it in friendly hands. But I made a call before they could. Cash offer. No contingencies. Closed in a week. And just like that, I owned the last sliver of her legacy. The best part was what I did with it next. I turned it into a dog park. Not just any dog park. One designed by a local rescue foundation Clara helped fund. It had obstacle courses, shaded benches, fresh water stations, and a small agility ring. The sign out front was carved from reclaimed barn wood and read "Welcome to Liberty Tales," a place where boundaries are respected. The opening weekend was a hit. Dozens of neighbors showed up with their pet. Children laughed. Dogs ran wild through the open gate. And across the road, Karen's former lot bloomed into joy and chaos of the best kind. Not a clubhouse. Not a tennis court. Just life, freedom, and a whole lot of barking. People kept stopping by to shake my hand. Some brought pies or fresh eggs. One woman said her kids had never felt welcome in the HOA clubhouse, but now they had a place they actually wanted to visit. I didn't build it for the credit. I built it because I could. Because I wanted something on that land that made people smile instead of frown. Something that reminded everyone what a community is actually supposed to be. Not a kingdom ruled by fear, but a place where people respect each other's space, their choices, and yes, their fences. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast orange across the fields, I sat on the same porch where Karen had once stood and told me to stay out of the way. I watched a pair of kids toss a frisbee to their golden retriever just across the road, laughing until they fell into the grass. It felt like balance. Not revenge, not pettiness. Just justice. It was never about destroying Karen. It was about showing that no one gets to take what doesn't belong to them. Especially not from someone who's willing to fight back. The final chapter came in the form of an envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a typed letter, signed and notarized. A court-mandated apology. Karen had been ordered to issue it as part of the settlement, and though it was clearly written by her lawyer, it was still legally hers. It acknowledged the zoning fraud, the trespassing, the false listings, and the emotional distress caused by her actions. I read it once, smiled, and placed it in a cheap frame. Then I hung it in the hallway beside 2 other items. My grandfather's original land deed, and a photo of the new dog park filled with muddy paws and wagging tails. That was the legacy I wanted. Not bitterness. Not a war story. Just the truth and the proof that sometimes standing your ground means more than just refusing to leave. It means building something better when others try to tear it down. It means not letting entitled people rewrite your future with their lies. It means knowing who you are and refusing to be erased. That night, I walked the property one last time before turning in. The stars were bright, the night air quiet. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. My dogs padded alongside me, tails wagging, and I knew this chapter was over. The land was mine. The peace was earned. And Karen's story would forever end with one simple truth. She tried to sell my farm while I was still living in it, and I turned that scheme into a legacy that would outlast her for generations.